Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very last lecture of our course, week 5, lecture B or 2, which means the 10th lecture. As I've said in the last video, our final week is dedicated purely to toward discussions for the course and your presentations. This implies that I'm expecting, in place of your time commitment for the lectures, for the lecture material, a commitment to discussing presentations and to your second case studies. So I guess I should be really clear about it. It's really important that you discuss early. We only have 1 week of the course left, well, depending upon when you're viewing this, a week and a half or 2 weeks. But basically 1 week left. And it's important to do the discussions before the very end of the course. It's extremely important. I mean, just think about it logically. Is it a discussion if you're doing it at the end of the course? There's no room for there to be a back and forth, right? At that point, it's not a discussion, it's more like a monologue. So we want to discuss early so that people can respond and there can be some sort of an exchange back and forth. Again, I want to thank a few of you for really digging into the discussions and getting involved. I want to thank Brianna in particular again for really being at the forefront of a lot of that. Okay, so to reiterate what we've produced in this course, and to be forward, today's lecture is going to be short. I'm going to try and keep it short, unlike some of my previous lectures, which are really abstract for around an hour and something. Today, I'm going to try to keep it short. If I don't stay true to that commitment, please forgive me, but it is my intention. I want to begin, though, by reiterating some things that we've been producing together in this course. And I say producing, I should really be saying inventing, because I have a different sort of approach, as no doubt you've noticed, to teaching, where to some extent I don't know what we're going to invent. But in every one of my courses, usually around the end, we have some sort of unique model, some unique argument or chart or something there. And although some of the material or arguments might be similar across some of my courses, there's nonetheless something unique or singular at the very end. Okay, so what we claimed was that there's basically 2 contexts. I'm not going to bring up a whiteboard to write it again, but we said that there's the modern and there's the postmodern context, the modern and the contemporary, if you like. And we also said that there are 3 different major orientations or schools of thought here on culture and on media. We've labeled them respectively the Toronto school or orientation, the Slovenian, and the British or Birmingham school or orientation. And we went through each school. Last week we discussed finally the postmodern context and one approach within the postmodern context, namely the Slovenian approach of Mladen Doler. And we claimed that something changed in the shift. Maybe it is important for some of you who are more visual learners to kind of see my argument rather than just hear it. We claim that in the movement from one context to another, from modern to postmodern, something shifted in this movement into the postmodern. The postmodern being, of course, the full realization of modernity of the modern. At least that's our kind of running definition. We have some other characteristics of postmodernity and modernity as well, but that's how we've been kind of describing it. And we claim that this shift has something to do with underlying forces, social forces or social pressures. We've described them as urbanization, the growth of crowds, the triumph of quantity over quality, secularization, and so on and so on and so on. And this led to a shift of context, a shift of social structure, a shift of the environment, of the context. And we also claim that in this shift from the modern to the postmodern, it led to a widespread suspicion, particularly in the West, suspicion or distrust in meta-narratives, in universal theories of truth, universal standards or metrics to assess what constitutes a truth claim or what constitutes a fact or truth or objectivity and so on. And that's a shift from the modern episteme, where meta-narratives were quite prevalent, although in the process of shifting. It resulted in a movement from secrecy to gossip and rumors. Quite a different, gossip and rumors are quite a different type of secret. And also a movement from universal, explicit epistemologies, that's meta-narratives, universal, explicit epistemologies, toward particular, relativist, localized epistemologies. And that's also a key shift that we discussed in the last class more particularly. I want to today move closer into the psychoanalytic orientation to provide you with a bit more nuance about what is going on in all of this. I say psychoanalytic, but hopefully we're going to extrapolate from the psychoanalytic to have something much more sociological. Well, not hopefully, I know we will. So this week I included the following texts online. First, I included the full text translation of, I don't know if you call it an essay or a book. It's quite the essay if it is an essay. So it tends to be printed as a book, and it was Sigmund Freud's Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego. It's a translation of the German text. That's the first one I put online. It's a very long text. It's more than 110 pages. I know that. So I'm not asking you to read it all. In fact, I'm not asking you necessarily to read it at all. This one I'm claiming is a bit less important than some of the other texts. So, what you can do if you want is you can choose a single section from the text or chapter. It's really more of a section. Choose a section and just read it. Read any one section from this text and you'll get something from it. It has to do with, you notice the word group, it has to do with the notion of the social bond and what constitutes the social bond. I also included a short text, which I want you to read in full for this week. It's really the only text that I'm explicitly asking you to read in full for this week. I keep saying this week, I mean this lecture. I realize we have 2 lectures with multiple readings for each, which I know can be overwhelming for many of you. But for this lecture, I do want you to read this text. It's very short. It shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes, to be honest. If you're reading much more carefully, maybe half an hour, but probably not. So yeah, it's very short. It's not even like what you would traditionally consider to be an essay. It's so short that I think it might even only be 3 pages. I can't remember off the top of my head now. But it's also by Sigmund Freud. And it's called, well, people have translated in different ways. The Family Romance or Family Romances. I tend to call it The Family Romance. I don't know what the German title is, so I can't tell you the literal translation, but it's one of these. The literal translation is probably Family Romances. So this is what's important about this text, I should tell you right up front before I get into it later, is that it is a precursor to Freud's infamous Oedipus complex theory, his theory of the Oedipus complex. A sort of provisional early version of that theory appears here in this text, The Family Romance. And that's why I've selected it. It's probably much easier to read and understand than some of the later stuff anyway. Finally, there's a much more difficult text, a very, very difficult text, precisely because it's a contemporary text. It's situated in the contemporary moment. And, Freud's work was very difficult to understand at the time at which he was writing, I'm sure. precisely because it's new. It's a new way of thinking. And when new ways of thinking are introduced, they tend to be difficult, and there's a lot of resistance to understanding them. But Freud is easier to understand today precisely because we've had more than 100 years to digest it, and it's entered into the popular culture. Even if you've never heard the name Sigmund Freud before, you've heard something about Sigmund Freud without even knowing it. This third text is by Eric Laurent, French name, Eric Laurent, and it's titled Protecting the Child from the Family Delusion. It's, of course, a very provocative title. Protecting the Child from the Family Delusion. There's honestly a lot going on in this very short, difficult, abstract, theoretically dense text by Eric Laurent. And I'd really love to get into all of it, but I'm just going to take a little piece from it for our purposes today. What I'm asking for this text is that you just skim it a little bit. So really what I'm asking you, what's required is to fully read this text and to kind of skim this text. And if you like, to just sort of read a short section of this text, but this is the ultimate, the one that's most important. Okay, so what is the function of Eric Laurent's text? Well, its function is to offer us a point of contrast from the Oedipus complex. In other words, to show us that something has changed. The general structure of the social bond, known as the Oedipal structure, the Oedipal complex, has shifted in contemporary society in postmodernity. So if we were to say, for example, that Freud's work is situated in the modern context, then Eric Laurent's work is trying to update Freud's work within something like the postmodern context. Well, Laurent calls it hypermodern context, but basically I'm using that as a synonym. The hypermodern context is the postmodern context as far as I'm concerned. So the text by Eric Laurent is central because it situates the family romance, as described by Freud, not within the period of modernity, but within a period of hypermodernity, or what we've been referring to as postmodernism or postmodernity. It's a period when the structure of the family has changed, right? I'll just give you a few quick sort of examples of how it's changed without getting into all the empirical evidence, which I've done in other courses. I don't see a reason to dig into the data and stuff like that. You'll just have to take my word for it, I guess. The family has changed. The ideal of the modern family, marriage was much more prevalent. Heterosexual marriages were prevalent. We used to speak of the nuclear family, which was the single child household and a mother and a father. Well, it's quite clear that that's not necessarily as prevalent as it used to be. We're not interested in why or whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. We're just interested in the fact that that's true. Marriage is much less common today, and this is how Laurent is opening up his text by discussing this. And the basic structure of the family has shifted. It's not the nuclear family as the ideal anymore. In fact, it is widely accepted that families come in many shapes and many types today. So let's see what's happening for the child and the family in this switch or shift from the context of modernity to the context of hypermodernity or postmodernism. What I'm going to do is give you a sort of primer, a very bare bones introduction to Freudian Oedipal theory, the Freudian theory of the Oedipus complex and the family romance, before moving into this abstract discussion, the theoretical intervention that I have sort of sketched out in my head for you for today, to see what is happening with the contemporary family, the contemporary child, and to see how that relates to what we've been talking about in this course. So let's begin. The Oedipus complex, or family romance, we can use them almost interchangeably for our purposes because they're basically the same thing. There are some subtle differences between what Freud was calling the family romance or what he called the Oedipus complex. But the differences are not reasons to think that family romance is a separate thing from the Oedipus complex. It was an early attempt to theorize the Oedipus complex, and the Oedipus complex is the fully developed sort of theory that Freud came up with. Not so much a theory, but based in actually in clinical experience and clinical fact. So this earlier paper on the family romance was developed in the earliest part of the 1900s. I think it was 1906. I believe it was 1906, but let's say the early part of the 1900s. As you know, this is a very long time ago. It's more than 100 years ago. And you can imagine a lot of things have changed in our society since then. Our society has changed quite profoundly. Our economy has changed. The basis of our economy has changed. Our governments have changed. Indeed, our family has, the structure of our families and our family lives and our experience in a family has fundamentally changed as well. Basically, in this earlier theory of this modern theory of Freud's, the child feels deprived. Freud learns that children quite often feel deprived of love, deprived of affection, at precisely the moment within its psychological development when it realizes that the family, the mother in particular, is not entirely available endlessly to serve king baby, king toddler, king child. Child thinks itself as something like a king. I think Freud even referred to the child at one time as his or her royal highness, the child, or something like that. So there comes a moment in our development as children, in our psychological development as children, according to Freud, in the modern period, where we realize that our mothers in particular cannot entirely satisfy our emotional needs, our demand for love, basically. And as a child, according to Freud, we have a very difficult time coping with this fact that the resource love, to quote a folk musician, Father John Misty, maybe love exists in an economy of resource scarcity. I'm paraphrasing a line from one of his popular songs. You know, there's a sense in which love seems to be a scarce resource suddenly. I want more, I'm not getting enough. My mom doesn't give me all the attention that I wanted, all the love that I wanted. Maybe it's distributed among myself and my dad, or myself and a sibling, or something like that. But I'm not the center of the world. So the child has a really difficult time coping with this. We may have, according to Freud, repressed our memory of the difficulty of this moment in our lives, but inevitably through careful, difficult work of psychoanalysis, we come to realize this perhaps. And the child begins as a consequence. I'm going to just kind of give you the narrative of what's going on, then I'll write it out and give you some structure and some concepts, I guess. So the child begins to fantasize about what? About his or her or their ideal family, the ideal family structure, a better family, a family that provides love. The child thinks perhaps to him or herself, you know, why did I end up in this family? What lottery did I win to be born into this family? When I look around, maybe the child's thinking, in fact, I'm not going to lie to you. Why shouldn't I be personal? I remember thinking this when I was young. When I look around and I see all these other families, God, I wish my family was like that. I wish my family could be like these other families, the child thinks. I see these other families that are so much better than mine. They seem normal and mine seems dysfunctional. They seem so much happier. They seem so much to love each other so much more than my family, the child thinks, in the modern context. So you see, the child is beginning to compare his or her experience within the family precisely to another family, but not to the real other family, rather to a fantasy, a projection of what this other family's life is like. Goes looking for signs to prove that this fantasy is correct, for example. So the child's comparing by idealizing or positing a more perfect or ideal family that exists independent of one's own family. Okay, so it's important to point out that Freud believed that this is basically a normal process for all children at this stage in his own thinking of the theory of the Oedipus complex. When he's talking about the family romance, this is what he believes this is basically normal. I say the word normal, but it's interesting because if this is normal, then all families are dysfunctional to a certain a more or less degree. In other words, all families are neurotic. In the sense that being normal is to be neurotic, to be sick. Oh my God, I have a colleague who wrote a wonderful book titled On Being Normal and Other Disorders. What a wonderful title. He won an award for it. It's a really thick book on psychoanalytic diagnosis, which I encourage you to Google if you're interested in it. It really is a great book. So this is considered to be a normal sort of process of development for children. It's normal to kind of be neurotic and to have these thoughts. What's not normal is to not be able to accept it. Then the problems begin. Okay, so this isn't a course in psychoanalysis by any stretch of the imagination. It's a course in sociology. So we're interested in the social bond and the family and how we might generalize from this experience to understand something wider, namely the social experience. So we want to isolate key elements of family life, of modern family life, to discern its structure rather than its content. We're focused on the form of the social bond, the structure of the familial, the familiar and the familial social bond, the family. And what is its form in the modern context of, say, the early 1900s? Roughly, I would claim, between the late 1800s. So I'm going to put this is an arbitrary date, but let's say around this date, around 1890s to the 1970s, the early 1970s or something like that. Well, that's the modern family. The postmodern family is born in the late 1970s or early 1980s onward. If we were to give it a certain date, and I really hesitate to do that, but it could be a little bit helpful to serve as something of a heuristic for you. So I'll do it. So what is its form? Well, its form is basically neurotic. It's a neurotic social bond. It's a neurotic social structure, the family. So there is an expected type of suffering for the child, as there is among any member of a social bond within society, within a country, within a culture, and so on. A normal amount of suffering is expected. A normal amount of discontents in our civilization or in our society is expected. But in the family, a normal sort of neurotic amount of suffering is expected in one's relationship to one's caregivers at a very early age. So let's make things very, very superficial, precisely so that we can understand it at the structural level, at the abstract, at the theoretical level. So this is where we're going to say some things that you'll immediately think to be disagreeable, but we're trying to understand a certain structure so that we can extrapolate from it. So don't get too hung up on the words that I'm using, like when I use mother and father. It doesn't necessarily mean the mother as the person with the biological dictates of what it means to be a woman, therefore mother with a child. Mother is a function, father is a function. It has nothing to do necessarily with one's gender in psychoanalysis. So, but to make it easier, we'll say mother, we'll say father, we'll say child. There is in the beginning something of a mother for Freud, a mother-child unity, a mother-child fusion, if you like. I write it as a compound word to show that they're attached. They're tethered. This line here is like an umbilical cord for me. There is a unity of the child with the mother. Well, we know that to be true when a child is an idea within the mother's mind, while the child is inside the mother's stomach. There's quite a literal connection there. There's a sense of oneness, a fusion. The child does not at this point, from the child's perspective, understand a sense of self for itself. It doesn't know what itself is and what an other is. Right? Like if we think of self as an autonomous entity, like I am me, I am Dwayne, and other, you are a student, as two separate entities. At some sort of preliminary stage, there's a fusion, and what we actually have is a tethering of self and other, umbilical link. There's no self because there is no other, because there is only self and other. They're one. Maybe I'm thinking spontaneously, maybe I could draw it for you like this. You know, this is like the mother, maybe the mother's stomach. This is the child inside. Well, the child is a part of the mother in this sense. So there's a fusion here. The child doesn't yet have a psychological sense of self, nor does the child have a psychological sense of the other, of the mother as a distinct entity, individual, existing outside of the child. The child and the mother are continuous with one another, basically the same entity, the same experience from the child's perspective. Why? Well, because the child does not yet know that the mother's body, which provides it with so much of its needs, is in fact something separate from itself. It's basically still an umbilical connection. When a baby drinks milk, Freud would suppose that it believes that the breast is in fact not an entity outside of the child, but something that's actually a part of the child, one with the child. So the breast is the child's, from the child's perspective. It's not the mother's. When we refer to this as fusion, that's what we mean. So when I say the word fusion, we're talking about a sort of oneness of the mother and the child. Of the child with the other, if you don't want to gender it in the mother way, that would be fine too, the child with the other. Okay, this is a painful position to be in for Freud and for much of psychoanalysis. The position of this oneness of mother-child fusion, it's painful. It's not a good position to be in. The experience is quite painful. Having all of your needs met is something of a painful position, but it's also a position of comfort to have all of your needs met. So you have this weird sort of apparent contradiction. It's painful, it's comfortable, you're happy with it, you're not. We have a really difficult time as adults, let's say, imagining this as a position that could be simultaneously painful, a position of suffering, and a position of comfort at the same time. We have a really hard time with that, especially in the English language, because we don't have a word in the English language that allows us to describe something that is painful and pleasurable or comforting at the exact same time. We don't really have a word or a concept for that. That's why many years later, although Freud was still alive, a psychoanalyst by the name of Jacques Lacan described this experience of simultaneous pain and pleasure using a French word, jouissance. Jouissance is a form of stimulation that is simultaneously can be painful or pleasant or pleasure. You know, I guess the closest English word is the one that George Simmel gives us, which is stimulation. When you think of stimulation, you can think of something that feels good, I'm sure, but you can be stimulated also by the blade of a knife, and it could hurt quite bad, right? So stimulation kind of carries this more ambiguous sense of jouissance. So this is the new word that was invented many decades later by another Freudian, namely Jacques Lacan. to get a sense of how something can be both painful and pleasurable at the same time. And the word is jouissance. The fusion of the mother can result in something like a fountain of jouissance. Because jouissance is overwhelming. It's an overwhelming stimulation. So much pleasure that it hurts. Now, again, as with every other class, every other lecture that I've given in this course, I begin with all this abstract stuff, and you're like probably scratching your head. Oh, I can't get it. But I give you the concrete stuff later if you just are courageous enough to try and move through the abstraction. And I will give you some concrete examples of jouissance, don't worry. But the fusion of the mother to the child, the oneness of the mother-child, of the child-mother, I should say, is like a fountain of jouissance from which the child cannot seem to easily escape. It doesn't want to because it's comforting, yet at the same time it's suffering, so it needs to. It's a really difficult position to be in. It's a bit like an addiction, isn't it? When you're addicted to a substance, for example, it's killing you, it's hurting you. People are dying from addictions. Yet at the same time, it's like it gives you some comfort. And so you go to the next one, you go to the next pill, you go to the next drink, whatever else. I hesitate to tell this joke. I've told it before in one of my classes. It's not a joke I get any pleasure in telling you. It's as with many jokes, there's something of a truth that we can sort of grasp through the jokes. Make no mistake, Freud wrote a book on jokes and the relation to the unconscious for this reason. But there's a Canadian comedian named Norm Macdonald, who, I'm not going to give this joke to you in the form of a punchline because I don't want to intentionally in the classroom, it's a very difficult thing to do in the classroom, make light of anybody's suffering. So I'm not going to give it to you in the form of an actual joke with a punchline. I'll explain the joke to you. Norm Macdonald gave a joke, and he was talking about how one of his friends is an alcoholic, which is a form of addiction. And he said to his friend, Norm Macdonald, listen, I know you have a disease, alcoholism, but it seems to me like you have the best one. You see the point. You could think, what a terrible joke. But what is the point of the joke? What's the truth of the joke? The truth of the joke is that it's the worst disease precisely because it is the best. You get to enjoy your disease, you know? So you're trapped in it. That's what makes it so terrible, that it is the best disease. That's the point of the joke. So at least from Norm Macdonald's perspective, I'm not claiming it's the best. I certainly wouldn't do that. So it's a form, jouissance is a form of stimulation. It's a form of enjoyment, if you like, pleasure, that is so much pleasure that it hurts. It hurts us too much. So what is the father in all of this for Freud? Well, the father, during the time of the modern nuclear family, the father is basically a function. I don't want you to think about father in the Freudian tradition as inherently being biological, although Freud does intimate that quite often. We've come a long way since Freud. The father is more like a function. A woman can act like a father. A woman can act like a mother and a father. A man can act like a mother. A man can act like a mother or father. These are functions, not necessarily essences in the psychoanalytic tradition. So what is the father function? What is the function of a father in Freudian, modern Freudian theory? Well, the function of the father is basically to separate, to cut into the mother-child fusion. So the father kind of pulls the child out from the fusion, separates the child. Now the child is out here instead of in here, right? So now the child has a sense of self. It has some distance from the mother and so on. The function of the father is to subtract jouissance, to remove the overwhelmingness, to remove the jouissance. this is key. In modern Freudian theory, the function of the father is to get rid of the jouissance, the pain of the mother-child fusion, which doesn't mean to rip the child away from the mother as if the mother doesn't exist anymore or anything like that. It's to produce distance, a triadic social bond. So that's the function, and we could ask, what is the function of the mother as well? I'm just trying to keep things very, very simple and rudimentary and structural for us. The father subtracts from the stimulation, from the jouissance. The father forces a sacrifice on the part of the child of his or her or their enjoyment of jouissance. The father does this very simply through the imposition of a rule, a law, basically a no. It's a law, it's a prohibition, a no. No, you cannot remain one with the mother, very simply. So the father, and I realize this is probably the most difficult class of the entire course for you, and I apologize. So if you need to take it slow, please take it slow, please pause, please take it one by one, please take notes and write these concepts down. The function of the father is to subtract jouissance through the imposition of a law, the law of the father, the name of the father, the no of the father. The father says, no, you cannot enjoy yourself to the child. No, you cannot continue to enjoy yourself. Be clear, this no is a signifier, what's the Sora called a signifier. It's a product of language. It's through the no of the father that the child, quite begrudgingly, as you can imagine, becomes separated from the mother. This is Freud's wager, this is Freud's theory, this is Freud's supposition. This is the cornerstone of the Oedipus complex. The child becomes separated from the mother, no longer suffers from the overwhelming jouissance, but it's begrudgingly, which means that he's not happy about the father's rule. The father perhaps is a tyrant, an authoritarian, the law of the father. The child is a bit like an anarchist. He doesn't like this. The fusion is cut into and replaced. It's replaced by a substitute, and that substitute is language. Now the child must speak. There's a signifier present now, right? There's signifiers suddenly. We're in language. Look, I'm going to put it very clearly. When you have all of your needs met, you're fed exactly when you're hungry. You know, you're kept warm exactly when you feel cold. All of your needs are met. Why ever speak? Like, honestly, that's an honest question. Why would you have a need to speak? Speaking is there so that we can tell people what we desire. I'm cold, warm me up. Mom, I want to drink some milk. So you cry, you make sounds to signal that, signifiers, you make sounds out there, right? So the no of the father forces us to accept language, to speak. This is the point. That's the substitute for the fusion of the mother-child relationship. And this is the foundation of the modern Oedipus complex. Okay, I can't get into it any more than that. And I know that's already quite a bit. There's so much more I'd love to say here, and I'd be happy to do it in the forums if any of you post some questions to me or whatever. But basically, when all of our needs are met in the mother-child dyadic social bond, the mother-child dyadic social bond, the fusion, the intensity of that dyadic social bond, well, we can say, since we know this from George Simmel, there's no distance, right? There's no distance. So it's a fragile, it's a dangerous, it's a volatile social bond. It's at the level of need. There's no distance there. It's only in a triadic social bond that you get distance. So the father's function is to inject that distance. Distance is what's required for there to be an identity for the child, an autonomous identity for the child, for there to be a sense of self, a sense of autonomy, separation from the other. That's what the no of the father instigates. So in place of jouissance, which is now canceled, the child enters into perhaps something like, you can imagine, a psychological rivalry with the father. Like, why would my father do that to me? Maybe I'll plot this out again. So, let's put it maybe in stages. I'm thinking spontaneously here now. So we have I prefer to say child mother rather than mother child. You have the child mother fusion, stage 1, and we know that is characterized by jouissance. We know that it's a dyadic social bond. We know that it's volatile, but that's included in the definition of jouissance to some extent. We know that there's no real need of language here. And then in stage 2, we have a sort of child separated now because of a no of the father from the mother. And that means jouissance is kind of canceled. So we can sort of cross it out. Jouissance is gone. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a concrete example of this still. So we've canceled jouissance because of the no. We have language. It's a triadic social bond. Suddenly, because the no is the place of the father here. The father function in modern Freudian theory. Again, this isn't my position. This is Freud's position. And now the child perhaps is angry at the father for this no. Why would you do that? I was comfortable there in my pain. Why would you separate us? A naive example would be the child is sleeping in the mother's bed. The father gets home from work and says, no, you need to go to your own room. And the child's like, no, I want to sleep in my mother's bed. And then you feel like what the father did was he took some of your enjoyment from you. The law, the state is taking this enjoyment from you. Somebody's, the father figure, somebody's taking this enjoyment from you. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good when somebody subtracts your jouissance, negativizes it, crosses it out. That's not a good feeling. You get relief from it, but you nonetheless don't feel happy about it. That's the price you pay for the relief, not to feel happy. In other words, to make the father into something like a rival, and the child a bit like an anarchist. So language is something like a peace treaty with a contract with the father. Okay, let's move just a little bit further. When jouissance is canceled out, what do we get in place of jouissance? We get, and it was missing in the first phase, we get desire. We can finally have desire. Over here, we can't have desire. Why would you have desire? That's why I'm crossing it out. Why would you have desire if all of your needs are met? You don't desire. It's only when something of what you need is not met that you can desire, right? That's what the no produces. You were separated from the mother. Now you desire to return to the mother. You desire to return to the enjoyment that you think you lost. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you a very concrete example of this so that hopefully you can understand what I mean. I think I'll leave this up on the screen instead of going back to me. And then I'll try and give you an example of what's going on in the concrete postmodern context, and that'll be it. Imagine for yourself, this is an example I often give in a lot of my classes. Imagine a child is playing video games. So the child is, in some sense, immensely stimulated by the video games. Maybe it's a piece of technology where it's over your face, the Oculus Rift or whatever. The child is playing video games immersed in this environment, the maternal environment, if I can put it like that in the Freudian way. Intensely stimulated. It's almost like there really is an umbilical connection there, isn't there? The wire of the controller. I know wires are basically obsolete, but we could at least imagine the umbilical cord when the wire was there. It's a fusion of the child to the video game, to his or her or their enjoyment. Okay, so I know cases, and perhaps you do too. It's very common. I used to, in my practice, see some children, and I used to, in my practice, talk to people who were children at one point. And I know that the enjoyment can be so intense. You can be so fixated in the fusion with your video game as a child that you won't feed yourself. You won't go to the restroom to use the bathroom. You won't brush your teeth. You won't do these basic things. Children may urinate in their pants instead of going to the restroom. This happens. It happens a lot more than perhaps we want to admit, because nobody's separating them from the video game. The child is there, the eyes perhaps bright red and bags under the eyes, playing all day long at this video game. At some level doesn't want to play, but can't stop playing because the enjoyment is so intense. There's nobody separating there. So you can see it can be quite self-destructive, peeing yourself, whatever else. It can be quite terrible. The jouissance is quite literally destroying. Okay. The child doesn't realize perhaps, and this is Freud's wager, that he or she or they really want some relief, wants somebody to blame, wants the law of the father to separate him or her, wants something to complain about here. So when the father comes into the bedroom or the entertainment room or whatever, the living room, and says, standing up straight, son or daughter, or hey, you there, you can know you cannot play video games. The child naturally is going to feel quite upset. The child's now separated, can shower, can brush his teeth, can use the restroom, but desire has now been ignited. It's precisely because the father separated the child from the video games that the child is now fantasizing, desiring a return to the enjoyment that he or she or they thinks they lost. I want to go back and play these games. Wouldn't it be amazing if I can go play Minecraft or Fortnite again? It's precisely a desire that's ignited to play the video games, to return to that which one believes oneself to have lost, the jouissance that has now gone missing. That's what desire is. Desire is it's a desire to return to the jouissance that one believes one has lost, represented here by the line going through le jouissance. Desire is the price we pay for the loss of jouissance, and the price we pay is a desire to return back to what we lost. Okay, so that's basically the structure, the modern structure of desire, of the family romance, of the Oedipus complex. We don't need to get too hung up on the specifics. Child, mother, father, it could be child video game, could be child and candy. A child can endlessly eat sugar, rot its teeth, get sick, it will keep going. A child might play ball out, might kick a ball out in the middle of the street, might get hit by a car unless somebody's there to say no, right? So the family is just one example of this structure. Our society in the modern period, according to Freud, is quite much, very much built this way. The modern period was the period of political revolutions. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, would you believe if I told you, because you probably don't hear it very often, would you believe that they spent a considerable amount of their intellectual energy researching anthropology, works of anthropology? Why? So they could find a primitive age, an age of harmony, of jouissance, there before capitalism existed, on some remote island where everything was egalitarian, equal, and beautiful, where there was a fusion, a communism, the root word of community, communism, communication, meaning unity, to bring together, fusion. They were seeking, Marx and Engels, a time when humanity did not yet have to give up their jouissance. Before the imposition of the law of the state, of the government, which is the function of a father in society, before they imposed a rule on humanity's jouissance, what Marx and Engels had was a communist desire, which is no different from an Oedipal desire, a desire to return to the oneness of jouissance. Indeed, our governments in the modern period were very much like fathers, like father functions, right? We're focusing on the structure. We're not trying to personify it. They had this sort of paternal, father-like function. They were patriarchal. They imposed rules in the form of prohibitions. No, they said, no, this rule says, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. They told us what we couldn't do, what we couldn't enjoy, how we couldn't enjoy ourselves. If we want to go really far back, if you want to be a bit more provocative, you can even find it in the Abrahamic religions, in the very first of the Abrahamic religions, namely Judaism, which forms the cornerstone of Christianity and Islam. It got off the ground with the tablets of the law, which were brought down from Mount Sinai. And what did they say? They were universal prohibitions that said what you couldn't enjoy. You can't enjoy the property of another person. You can't enjoy the wife or the husband of another person, your neighbor's partner. It was about what you couldn't enjoy. It was a restriction on jouissance. Of course, it gave rise to all kinds of perverse fantasies, I'm sure. They were prohibitions. And they were universal prohibitions, which means that they were something like meta-narratives. They were like meta-narratives. The Oedipus complex is a meta-narrative. It's the family romance. It's a meta-narrative. And we believed in that meta-narrative. And it structured our world because we believed in that meta-narrative. Just like the meta-narrative of Judaism structured the world, or a large segment of the world for quite a period of time, and perhaps still does. It existed. We existed in a world structured by these universal prohibitions, by meta-narratives. Meta-narratives were there in a world where we still had desire for things that we couldn't have, like partners, sexual partners, products, access to other people, so on. Okay, so we should ask ourselves, is this the way that the family is structured today? Is this the way that our society is structured today? The obvious answer is, of course, no, because we're in the postmodern context, and the meta-narratives, we're suspicious of them, intensely suspicious of them. The meta-narratives, the authority of meta-narratives seems to have fallen. So it's not so clear that we're in the modern episteme anymore. The state, since the 1970s into the 1980s, is reduced to some minimal functionality, funding of repressive apparatuses like the army, the courts, the police, and so on. Also facilitating capital, international trade, domestic economic growth. This is the role of the state, put very naively. I'm not a political theorist necessarily. We talk more and more these days of a free economy, of free markets. We challenge our authorities, pervasively challenge all authority figures. Our government apologizes to us for, going on vacation during the pandemic or whatever. Our professors are ranked by students, so we don't necessarily feel our professors to be authorities on knowledge anymore. Our police are openly challenged in the streets and so on. All of this is not to suggest that I think this is a good thing or that I think this is a bad thing. That's not my point at all. I'm not interested in an ethical discussion of whether this is good or bad and what the ideal society is. Should we regress to a patriarchal society again? Should we return to meta-narratives? Is this better than what? I'm not so interested in those sorts of discussions. I'm simply trying to demonstrate to you how the world is structured today. The old universal prohibitions that characterize the Oedipus complex are not operating in that way. The father no longer says no to the child in the same way, to give you a concrete example. Instead, the father, when present, will enter into the entertainment room, the bedroom, the living room, in which the child is playing video games, and the father will not stand tall like he did before, or she or they did before, usually he in the modern period. But the father will bend down, perhaps pick up a controller with a video game controller alongside the child and play for a little while with the child and say to the child, I'm your friend and your father. And the father will say, um, you have choices over whether or not you want to stop playing video games. We'll give a choice, sometimes a false choice, but a choice nonetheless. And it produces very profound and very nuanced new problems in the postmodern society. Take as a psychological example, and I'm getting toward the end, don't worry. I think I've gone longer than I said I would. Take the example of depression, which is pervasive in contemporary postmodern society. Depression is quite a postmodern phenomenon. What is depression if not a failure at the level of desire, a failure to instigate desire? Often, though not always, it's related to a moral failure. It's often related to what we perceive to be a moral failure, a sense of guilt, if you like. I'm going to give you an example, a concrete example from Slavoj Žižek, who I've referred to a lot in the last half of the course. He said, imagine in the postmodern period, the father going into the bedroom, the entertainment room, the living room, whatever, where the child's playing video games, and saying one of two things. Let's say the modern father. What does the modern father say? The modern father says, no, you can't play video games. You must go visit your grandmother for the holidays. Okay, well, we know the consequences of that. What are the consequences? The child is upset. I want to play video games. You've instigated a desire, provided some psychological relief, whether the child's aware of it or not, and it's not important that the child is aware of it. And the child simply has to sort of recognize the authority, the patriarchal authority of the father. I'm not saying this is an ideal solution, and I'm not saying this is something we should have today. I'm certainly not saying that because I don't believe that. But that's how it functioned in the modern period. What about the postmodern father? Postmodern father doesn't say no. The postmodern father will come in and institute a moral authority. A little bit different. Authority is still there, but it's there in a hidden and much more cunning and perhaps even much more dangerous, precisely because we don't see it as an authority, way. What does the postmodern father say? The postmodern father gets down, picks up a controller beside the child, plays for a little bit, gets down to the child's level and says, my son, my friend, your grandmother really loves you. You know your grandmother loves you so much and she wants to see you for the holidays. We'd all love for you to go. We'd love for you to be there. Do you want to go? You see, the postmodern father, unlike the modern father, gives the child the choice, the freedom to choose. But it's, the child's not an idiot. The child knows at some level, tacitly perhaps, that this is imbued with a certain moral obligation. The child's not an idiot any more than the father. So the child knows that the morally correct choice is to go because the mother loves him, or the grandmother loves the child, and because it's the holidays and everybody wants him to go. So the child knows that there's a moral sense, a moral obligation to go. If the child says, no, I choose to play video games, and the father respects it, then the child fails at a much deeper level. The child fails to make the right choice. The child has nobody to blame for the failure, can't blame the father. It was the child's own choice. So the child fails to live up to the moral rule. This is ultimately the point. He has nobody to blame, he or she or they has nobody to blame except him or her or themselves. Can't blame the father, has to blame itself. This is how postmodernism works. We tend to feel the blame, the moral obligation for all of the world's problems. And when we fail, we feel it ourselves. We can't blame anybody else other than ourselves. That's the source of guilt, and that's the source of a lot of depression, and that's why some psychoanalysts refer to this as a moral failure. We live today within the context of a depressed society. A depressed society is one that thrives on moral cowardice, on responding to moral authority rather than paternal authority. We're depressed because we're afraid of having a desire of our own, of even having a monstrous desire. So what we got from Malad and Daulaire, if you remember, in last class, I promise I'm coming to an end now, is that the monster of authority has two faces. You know, Daulaire pointed out in his lecture that in the ancient Roman religions, there was a god named Janus, who's a, I don't know if I can't really draw it, but let's say it looks like this. Those are two faces looking in different directions, believe it or not. It's a two-faced god, one entity, so one body. Okay, two faces, one body. We know in the postmodern period that authority has two faces. The modern type of authority, the no authority of the father, is one very explicit, very obvious form of authority. In the postmodern form of authority, we have a moral authority, and it's much more insidious because we don't see it, according to Daulaire. Whereas Nietzsche claimed once that we have not yet killed God because we still have grammar. In other words, we still have grammar is syntax, it's rules, it's law at the level of language. We can go even further. So long as we still feel compelled by morals, by ethics, by moral authority, there is another hidden face of God that subjects us. We perhaps suffer even more under this Janus-faced God. So what is a child in all of this? What is a child in the postmodern environment? What sort of media object is a child even for the family? I would say the child today is freezing cold, alone. I say cold because it's cool media. The child is absolutely reconfigurable. Adaptable, must adapt to endlessly changing structures. The child is brought from family to family, lives today in multiple families, lives without a family, lives without siblings or with many step-siblings, or lives in a multitude of family types. The child is like a portable installation, endlessly moving around, like my child. My child has lived in multiple countries, has friends, yes, in all kinds of different countries, but no fixity, no stability. So the child is navigating this world without guarantees. His or her or their life is constantly reinvented, always expected to adapt. I think our biggest problem today is in the post-literate technological environment to think of the child, who's more than ever a lonely child, a child transfixed, existing in the world that we've built up for that child to live in. It's a world where gossip, between a stepmom and a child can constitute a new face of power. I'll stop there, and I wish you all well, and I look forward to discussions in the forum, and maybe I'll engage as well if I see an opportunity.